Hi, I'm Wayde Kirvida with CustomFIRE, and behind me is a new pumper we just completed for Hazel Green, Wisconsin. This truck is built on a Spartan MetroStar chassis, features a long 4-door cab and a 24-inch raised roof, and as you can tell, it's built for an enclosed top-mount pump panel. This truck measures 34 feet long and weighs 46,000 pounds with a full 1,500 gallons of water on board. This truck features a Waterous CSU 1500 single-stage fire pump, as well as an aluminum pumper body. And as you'll see, some creative design went into this truck to fit all the water and storage that they wanted in a relatively short overall length. Starting at the front of the truck, you'll see that we have a chrome extended bumper. We have a Q siren recessed into the front, a couple exposed tow eyes out the front, and then in the center we have a hose well for 100 feet of 1 3/4 hose. And obviously we have a front intake on this truck as well, with a strainer recessed into the front bumper apron. Up above you'll see that we have a FireTech high-vis 72-inch low-profile LED brow light, and then a Wayland light bar above that. And now standard on MetroStar chassis are the LED headlights. Now this truck is prepared for transit, so you're going to see that we taped over the outlets as well as strapped down some trays up in the hose bed. It's going to be departing here shortly for the customer. The cab is set up for seating for 5. We have the 2 forward seats obviously, and then in the rear we have 3 rear-facing seats. The outboard positions are rotated inwards 15 degrees, provides better peripheral vision for those occupants, and then better kind of cross-cab communications. Also gets your feet out of the stepwell on the rear doors. In the forward-facing outboard positions we have EMS cabinets, and then with a long 4-door cab, which means 68 inches from axle to back of cab, we have these standard 31-inch tall compartments as well. Now these ones open into the EMS cabinets as well in this configuration. One thing that may catch your eye is that this truck lacks a side intake on the driver's side. In fact, they don't have any side intakes on this truck. They are relying on front and rear intakes only. And that was a conscious decision by the fire department, realizing that they would benefit much greater by having front and rear intake ability than the side, as most of their operations are drafting. And if they're operating on a hydrant, then a front and rear works great for that as well. That's typical with all midship pumps with CustomFIRE is we have large removable panels on the sides. You can see here that it lends great access to the inside of the pump house, access to the control rods, the foam system, the valves, and anything else associated with the fire pump. So with this side panel off, I just want to point out the fire pump that we have on this truck. This is a Waterous CSU. It's a single stage 1500 GPM pump, and the CSU covers a span of 1500 up to 2250 gallons per minute. Below that is the CS, and that's typically a 1250 rated pump. On the Hail product line, you're going to have a Q Flow or the Q Max, so those will cover 1,000 up to over 2,000 gallons a minute. But the primary point I'm making here is that this is a full-bodied fire pump. It's the traditional fire pump, the one that spans over the frame rails. It incorporates all the intakes and discharge outlets into the pump casting. As of late, the market, a lot of manufacturers have moved towards using end suction pumps in a midship application. Not really a great idea. That's because an end suction pump features a single inlet on one side of the pump and a single outlet on top of it. In many cases it's either a 6-inch or an 8-inch inlet, and then typically a 4-inch outlet. So you're cramming all of the intakes, all the ways that the water gets into the pump, into one single path into the pump, and then all of the water coming out has to originate from the single outlet. So if you have a midship pump or a side mount or a top mount on order right now, or you're speccing one, you know, read your spec and make sure you do not have a CX or a CXS or an S100 or a DSD or an RSD fire pump. Those are not the appropriate pump. You should be using a Q Flow, a Q Max, a CS, CM, CSU, or CMU fire pump. Full-bodied pump, as I mentioned, has dedicated cast inlets for each intake. Here we have the driver's side intake capped off. You know, we could take this off and use it for pump testing, but in all reality they're not going to use it in typical operations because there's no valve here. On the other side it's the same case on the opposite side of the truck. Now this pump has cast inlets for a rear intake. It's a 5-inch inlet right into the back of the fire pump. They also have a 3.5-inch inlet into the back of the fire pump for the tank to pump. Dedicated inlets. The front intake is pulling off of the passenger side intake. On an end suction pump, you'd be relying on a single inlet to feed any intake and the tank to pump. And in many cases, that inlet's going to be off 180 degrees from the direction of the water source. And we all know that you don't want to spin water 180 degrees for optimal flow. And then finally on this side of the pump, we just have a nice lift up door providing access for inspection and access to the rods and, you know, the electrical harnesses and the back side of the gauges and whatnot. Behind the fire pump, we provided a module to house the speed lays and a cross lay. Now up above is for their blitz line. And below are a couple 1 3/4 lines. These will each carry 200 feet of hose with removable poly trays. Place them behind the fire pump, providing additional access to the front for service down the road. It also gets the hose away from the crew door. We've had customers remark that they like this feature because, you know, they're not pulling the lines out and then, you know, going forward right by the cab doors, for example, especially on an enclosed top mount where you might be in and out of the cab at times. And then we just provide an additional compartment here, a little bit of bonus storage for available space. So with the doors open on the driver's side of the body, you'll see that it has fairly traditional layout with what we call a shallow upper and a deep lower section. The upper depth is 14 inches and down below is 27 inches deep. Up ahead we have a swing out tool board and then a C-Tech toolbox in the driver front compartment. Over the rear wheels we do have shelf tracks if they wish to add a shelf at some point, but for now we have a raised mounting panel of pegboard there. And then in the rear driver's side compartment, of course, we have a heavy-duty rollout tray and a couple adjustable shelves. You can see that we have some hose packed up that they'll be using on their pre-connects. So as you know, battery-powered tools are more common on trucks now than in the past, and this truck relies on an inverter for line voltage power, basically providing on-scene power for shore charging points. This truck has duplexes in the front and rear compartments so they can, you know, recharge their cordless tool batteries and whatnot. The back of this truck has a fairly unique layout. It does incorporate many features that we've done over the years, but what you'll notice is that the back of the truck is essentially flush. There's really no tailboard to speak of. The reason for that is because everything is really accessible from the ground level. We got a 6-inch rear intake. We have a dedicated jet siphon discharge, 2.5-inch rear tank fill, and even the rear 2.5-inch discharges are easy to reach, especially when we put the elbows and caps on. Up above the rear intake we have slide-in storage for a 10-foot hard hose with a strainer attached. And then up above is just a cubby for additional, you know, storage, possibly carry a blitz fire nozzle in there. Now what you notice by now is that this truck has a low-level strainer with a hose attached on both the front and rear of the truck. I mean, this thing's going to be super fast to set up for draft, prime the pump, and get going. Up above we have a hose bed on each side of a central walkway. Now this poly tray is just there for transit. You can see it zip tied into place for now. But ultimately they're going to carry their 2.5 and 5-inch hose up in these hose beds, and they're going to be very easy to access and safe to operate with this walkway and ladder. So I'm up in the walkway here, and this walkway has excellent lighting all the way up the steps and then down the length of the hose bed. At the front of the hose bed is a recessed LED light, and down below those are a couple slots for a floor drain. So, this is certainly going to gather snow and water over its life, and we don't want that to become a hazard. So we have an FPA grip tread brake and floor drains, and it's well lit. And on either side we have a couple large hose beds with adjustable dividers. So this is just a fold-up wind deflector that's going to go over the front of the hose, and then on the back they'll have like a webbed cargo net. And as I mentioned at the beginning, this has a 1,500 gallon poly tank on board as well as a foam cell. Behind me is the front of the tank, and it sits higher than the rear portion of the tank. It's like an L shape. And that's just to, get the hose bed as low as possible and still carry that abnormally large amount of water for a single axle, I guess. On the opposite side of the truck, obviously we have a ladder rack on this side with the center arm over the rear wheels. The customer was here for their final inspection, and even then they remarked how nice the center arm ladder rack is versus the kind with dual arms. When this one's down, you can get to all your compartments. And because we're not relying on dual arms, we didn't have to notch the body or create a void area here for an arm. And on the back of the body, we didn't have to interrupt lighting or make any special provisions for that second arm. With the doors up, you can see that we have some adjustable shelving. We do have additional duplex outlets in these compartments. And then in the deep section here, we're accommodating 6 air bottles and then 3 full air packs. In the rear compartment, we have a large rollout tray. You may notice that this truck doesn't have the typical air bottle or fire extinguisher storage in the wheel well. That's really because it allowed us to lower this compartment floor, and that all played into the shape of the tank and getting additional volume and that sort of thing. When you have those large compartments, you'll notice that the wheel well sits about 4 inches higher. I dropped the ladder rack here so you could see how it's equipped. We have this large enclosure here for an additional section of 10-foot hard hose. So this truck carries the 2 10-foot lengths, one in the body above the rear intake and one in this rack, and then they have a 6-footer on the front with that additional low-level strainer. As well, we have an attic ladder, pike poles, and a roof hook, and then outside of the box we have a 14-foot roof ladder and a 24-foot 2-section. And they're all kind of concealed behind this like parade panel or squad panel to kind of just give it that uniform look on both sides of the truck. And this just helps illustrate the benefits of a center arm ladder rack where, I'm able to get into these compartments without doing the limbo or ducking under arms on each end of the rack. The criticism of a center arm like this is going to let you lose some of that compartmentation on the front. And that's true. You do lose about 20 inches of width over that rear wheel. But you could compare that to the arms on each side of the body that are about 6 inches wide and essentially full length of the compartment. So, you could shorten your body to fit the dual arm ladder rack, or you could leave it alone and carve out a space above the rear wheel for a single arm. All right, I pulled the panel off the officer side here to kind of get back into the pump discussion. You can see where we capped off the officer side intake. Again, they elected not to have any side intakes in favor of front and rear. We do have a front intake coming off the natural position with the Waterous casting here to head to the front of the truck. And then the rear intake comes right off the back of the Waterous casting on the rear of the fire pump. And that goes straight back through the rear of the body. On each one we have Akron electric butterfly valves. And then up above we have Akron manually operated discharge valves. Being that they are going to be drafting often with this truck, we put pre-primes on the front and rear intakes. We're running a 3/4 inch line on the atmospheric side of the butterfly valve on the front and rear. So that will pull water right up to the butterfly valve before you open it. And then when you transition by opening the valve and shutting off your tank to pump, it's a very smooth transition to draft. So right here I'm looking at 2 6-inch intakes and a 3.5 inch tank to pump. And on the full-bodied pump, they all have their own dedicated path into the fire pump. On an end suction pump, as I mentioned earlier, they're all being fed into a single eye of the impeller. Another benefit of the full-bodied fire pump is that it is horizontally split. That means the top and bottom halves are bolted together. You can unbolt and drop the bottom of the fire pump out to service the impeller, the shaft, and the seals. And you can do that without disrupting any of the intake or discharge plumbing because it all stays intact on that upper half of the fire pump. On an end suction fire pump, imagine it looks like a turbo or a snail, some people say. So it's like basically a single inlet and then the curl and a single outlet. Those are vertically split. So if you ever need to service your impeller or your seal or whatever, you gotta dismantle, in many cases just pull the pump out of the truck. So you're removing all the plumbing that goes to the intake side, and then you're removing the discharge plumbing because it's vertically split. So practically speaking, it's better to service the inside of your pump without having to disrupt the intakes and discharges and hope that they all go back together the way they were. And just a note as to the quality and craftsmanship of the people at CustomFIRE, I just want to point out the exquisite welds that we have here. TIG and MIG welded 304 stainless steel. We have a stainless steel subframe which supports the entire apparatus body, the poly tank, and the fire pump. The entire pump module is also stainless steel, and it's all been engineered and laser cut, so we just have a high level of fit and finish and precision. The driveline balance is perfect. The smoothness and quietness of operation is exceptional. So this is the long four-door cab. As I mentioned, it's 68 inches from the front axle to the back of the cab, so basically right here. The overhang is additional, and on a Spartan cab the engine tunnel stops at the front axle, so you essentially have 68 inches of floor space from the center line of the front axle to the back of the cab. In this cab we have 3 rear-facing seats. The outboards are canted in 15 degrees, gets your feet out of the stepwell, gives you better peripheral vision in those outboard positions. And on this cab, we did they went with the traditional heat and air conditioning on the engine tunnel, and that was so that they could free up space under the ceiling, where we have a couple large cabinets with power strips and drop-down mesh covers. We mounted some mat boxes in available space, and then, as you can probably see, we have some outboard EMS cabinets, and they open to the exterior, so you don't have to climb all the way into the cab to reach anything in them. So these pump panel controls are fairly new to the industry. This is one of the first custom cab enclosed top mounts that we've used them on. They're essentially a pistol grip controller. So these are made by Innovative Controls, and they do a fantastic job making hardware and bright work for pump panels and around the rest of the apparatus. But this is their newest manual control, and it basically pivots front and back on a central pivot, and when it does that, it's pulling a pin up that is unlocking the control handle. Before this, they had the version with the T handle, which you pull up with your fingers. They still offer that one. This has been very popular as of late, and they work beautifully. So you don't have to twist to lock. Just push it into place and it holds. This is a 5-inch discharge, so this has like a slow close mechanism on it due to the valve size. This is a driver's side 2.5. It's just like operates beautifully. Above that, we have the pressure gauges, Fire Research's newly refreshed Pump Boss controller, tank level gauges, and then the foam control head. On the lower tier, we have the intake controls, as well as a dedicated primer button for each one. I mentioned earlier that they can pre-prime the intakes on this truck, so if you imagine you have a folding tank in the front or the back, or front and back, unlikely scenario, but if you're drafting off one end or the other, you can push the primer to pre-prime the water up to the butterfly valve before you open it, and then you can open the butterfly valve as you close the tank to pump to transition from the booster tank to the folding tank. The main primer control has a lift gauge, and then it has the primer function. Once you're primed, flip it up into auto mode. That will engage the primer if it senses a pressure drop or any sort of cavitation. So if you're shuttling water and dumping water in and creating maybe an air pocket by the low-level strainer, that could introduce some cavitation, and the primer will I'll kick on momentarily to reestablish prime. Kind of sounds like that when it's doing it, and then it'll shut off as you get back to normal. Now the outward visibility of this cab is excellent. We have windows on all 3 sides, and then up above you'll see that we have a 10-inch display for the cameras. Now this truck has cameras on front and rear and both sides. What you can maybe tell is that we have 4 views here right now. This is the rear, the front, and each side. If you tap the screen, it'll expand to that single view. So this is the front. If you're watching a folding tank off the front of the truck, this is just excellent for that. Same for the back. That's the rear of the truck, where the folding tank would sit for drafting from the rear. And then we do have view out the sides, just to give you that better awareness of what's going on around the truck. On the upper opposite side of the cab, we have a 3rd Vista screen. Now this truck has a Vista for the driver and one for the officer, and then the 3rd one here replicating those functions. So they can control their scene lighting, the warning lights, dome lights, things of that nature from a pump operator without climbing through or going around to the front. So all in all, this is just a fantastic operating environment for the pump operator. It's great for rehab. It's just, these types of cabs lend themselves to a lot more functionality than just running the fire pump. The visibility outward is excellent. Access to controls, just the environment with the low noise levels is excellent in these trucks. And if you're on the fence of whether you want to enclosed top mount versus a top mount, for example, there's really no question. I mean, this truck is shorter than an open top mount, and the environment is excellent for the operator and for rehab and that sort of thing. We hope you enjoyed this walk around video of this new enclosed top mount pumper built for Hazel Green, Wisconsin. All of us at CustomFIRE appreciate the time you take to watch these videos. We'd love to hear from you if you're in the market for a pumper, a rescue, or a tanker. Please follow us on Facebook and visit our website at CustomFIRE.com, where we have an awesome selection of apparatus, deliveries, and information about our company. Thanks for watching. Oh, Jesus. Big struts. Did I say it's horizontally or vertically split? I better start over. What the hell was I going to say? Provides outboard Okay. In the back of the cab, is it okay? What is that? Is that like is that the furnace kicking in?
Yeah, I'm guessing, yeah.
I don't know. Am I in the frame?
A little bit, yeah.
Oh.
Most of you is.
Okay. Like my face, is you catching like from the nose down?
No, like just above your glasses is getting.
Oh, that's good, because I don't have any hair above there. Yeah, I don't even know where I left off or where I started. I should almost start over. We have a traditional, it's not traditional. Some water. That was from calibrating the foam system. And then with the proliferation, what's a better, easier word to say than proliferation? With the increased use, okay. In the rear, as always, we hope you found this video informative and entertaining. I don't know, what are they supposed to find? Are they supposed to be entertaining? All right.
Oh my gosh. Look at you.
I need some bloopers. Sorry, I'm just too perfect. You just don't get that stuff anymore.